Welcome to the Lunch and Learn podcast from the National Fire Chiefs Council to share knowledge and lived experiences on topics about equality, diversity and inclusion. We hope to create a momentum of learning, and we ask you to share widely with your friends and colleagues. Today, Rachel Salmon, Inclusion Officer and LGBT+ and Allies Co-Chair from Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, led the discussion on being part of the LGBT+ community, increasing understanding how LGBT+ awareness can contribute to the fire and rescue services meeting the needs of employees and communities.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's go for it. Let's give you a warm and a very inclusive welcome today. So my name is Catherine Billing and I come from Cornwall and I'm a member of Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service. It's a bit cloudy out there today. I always like to kind of completely perpetuate the stereotype of Cornwall that it is always sunny, and yeah, do you know what? It is still sunny out there today. But like I said, a very warm and inclusive welcome to a National Fire Chiefs Council Lunch and Learn. So saw somebody there munching on a banana, so by all means eat away and indeed listen away today, and a little bit later we'll certainly have opportunities for discussion and questions. It would be absolutely remiss of me if I didn't wish you or indeed highlight that today is International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Interphobia and Transphobia. And again, I think it's one of those times where certainly as a National Fire Chiefs Council, we're not just talking about being bystanders, we're talking about being anti-discrimination and anti-hate. So be brave, challenge, and let's really kind of advance opportunities and advance inclusivity with not only within our services but across the sector. Today I indeed have the great pleasure of introducing Rachel Salmon, who works at Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service. But not only does she work within Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, she is absolutely integral and key to much of the inclusion work that's happening within the Fire Chiefs Council. And believe me, the leadership, direction and pace of change has never been as rapid or as determined as I think we're seeing now. So it really does give me, and I really do kind of feel exceptionally privileged with all of the speakers that we have in our Lunch and Learn, and indeed Rachel sits there because she really is not only a true professional, but as I know you'll hear in a moment, very passionate indeed. So get your lunches ready, get your sandwiches ready. I will now pass you over to Rachel Salmon, and she will be giving the presentation today about being part of the LGBT+ community. Rachel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Catherine obviously mentioned, I'm going to talk today about Ida Hobbit, as you've probably heard it called, or International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia. I am one of the inclusion officers for Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, and I also co-chair the LGBT network as well. Before I do start, I will be giving a little bit of sort of an insight into Ida Hobbit, why we celebrate it and what some of the factors can be, but I will also tell a small part of my personal story. Some of that may be quite hard to hear for some people, and if that is the case, then if you need to dip out, turn cameras off or whatever, please do feel free. I always think it's worth mentioning as well that I'm a small part of the LGBT community. So although I will be sharing my story today, that's not to mean that everybody will experience that. Everybody's got a slightly different story, and I think it's important to hear a range of those voices wherever possible. So what is Ida Hobbit? You may have heard it referred to as that, or Ida Her in the past. What is it, and why do we actually celebrate that, and why is today such an important date for the LGBT community? So this event was actually sort of created or started in 2004, and it has grown since then. It's now celebrated in 130 countries, and that actually includes 37 where same-sex acts are illegal. I've seen some images today of certain countries, for example in Africa, where there's a small group of people celebrating, and obviously the bravery of those people in those communities where unfortunately to be in a same-sex relationship is still punished obviously goes without saying. It's incredibly brave. I think what's really important as well is to highlight that today we're celebrating people and trying to understand people with diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. Often, I think in LGBT, we can look at the L&G, we can look at, how we can support lesbian and gay colleagues and communities. The B and T can sometimes be forgotten or kind of skimmed over, and certainly everything that's incorporated and every person who's within the plus element can sometimes be forgotten. So I think it's really important that when we talk about Ida Hobbit and we talk about LGBT plus communities, that we hear as many different voices as possible. So I do a lot of community engagement, a lot of engagement with staff, and I quite often hear something along these lines. So, it's 2021, it's okay for everybody to be gay now. My cousin's best friend's neighbour's gay and he's absolutely fine with it. We quite often hear that in schools now, that there are trans young people, there are people who identify as somewhere on the LGBT plus spectrum, and that everybody's okay with that. And I do hear this a lot. Certainly, if we compare 2021 to 5, 10, 15, 20 and much further, into the past, things are better. But to say that everything's fine probably isn't particularly accurate. It's not all doom and gloom. I'll try and keep my cynicism to as low down as possible. But I do think it's important to be realistic. My kind of background before joining the fire service 4 years ago was working in a secondary school. I did see young people leave the school due to homophobic bullying. I saw young people leave the school due to transphobic bullying. And a lot of the work I do in LGBT youth groups at the moment, those young people are facing this on a daily basis from, schools, teachers sometimes, which is really sad, family members, and just people out in the streets who feel that they can sort of make comments. So although things are a lot better, I always think it's really important to highlight what else we can do. So, Catherine, I might be relying on you to look at the chat or for people to unmute. Does anybody know why the year 1992 is significant for people who are LGBT+? There's probably loads of answers to this, but I'm looking for a specific one.
Can't see any hands up or anything in the chat bar at the moment.
No worries. Bit of a niche question. So one of the reasons, obviously, it's the year I was born, just to highlight my age, which is the key factor. But actually, it's the year the World Health Organization declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. 1992, so 28 or 29 years ago, it was still technically mental illness to be gay. The work to change this began 31 years ago today, I believe, but that law or that kind of legislation wasn't actually changed until 1992. If you go further back and think of the older generation, and again, we do some work with an over 50s group in our local community, for those people, it's been illegal to be gay and punishable by going to prison. It's been a mental illness, and now, obviously, it is legal and more accepted than it was before. Quite often for those groups of people, it's very difficult to adapt to that mindset because they have had such changes. And I know there's been some quite high profile celebrities who've spoken about the changes in law and classification. The impact that can have on people only 28, 29 years ago and how that can impact now, the way that the media portrays LGBT people now, I think it's worth, thinking about and worth having in your mind when you think about some of the treatment LGBT people can face. And that really led me to think about sort of a timeline really of how far we have come in this time, or have we come that far? I started off by looking in the 1980s. 1983, there were 17 cases of AIDS in the UK. For those of you who've seen It's a Sin recently or know more about the 80s, maybe were growing up or at uni or at work in the 80s, you will be aware of a lot of the sort of propaganda and a lot of the interest negatively that was around AIDS, and the impact that had on the gay male community and the bi male community as well in that time. Moving forward towards the end of the decade, in 1987 was the introduction of Section 28 and Margaret Thatcher's introduction of that. She actually said, children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay. All of those children are being cheated out of a sound start in life. So in 1987, Section 28, essentially for those who aren't aware, basically said that schools could not talk about homosexuality in a positive way. Reading around the topic at that time, there was lots of homophobia in schools. Teachers, pupils made, openly homophobic comments. Teachers weren't allowed to be openly gay. And that sort of carried on over the next few decades and would have affected, generations of children who went to school at that time. In 1994, a bill was put forward to lower the age of consent for gay men to 16. It was defeated, but they did lower the age from 21 to 18. Couple of points here. Obviously, it's still not the same as for heterosexual, so it wasn't equal as it was for heterosexual people, which was 16 at the time. But also, there was no age of consent for women, which always slightly makes me smile because obviously people didn't think lesbians were a real thing. But also, it shows the inequalities between people who are LGBT and people who are heterosexual or in opposite sex relationships. In 2000, it was made law, again, this is the quotation, that homosexuals can now serve in the armed forces. That wasn't actually formalised until 2016, although it was said that from 2000 they could, before they were, subject to arrest and discharge. 2003, Section 28, as we mentioned earlier, was repealed. As a little bit of context, that was the year I started secondary school. So people were allowed to supposedly talk positively about the LGBT plus community. My sex education at school never mentioned people who are LGBT, did not mention, the differences in sexuality, nothing about gender identity, and was all focused on essentially how to avoid getting pregnant. It is a little bit better now in schools, but we will talk about education and education in schools in a moment as well. In 2008, same-sex parents had equal access if they had a child via IVF, which avoided some of the complications around adoption if a same-sex couple, one gave birth. 2014, same-sex marriage becomes legal. So there were civil partnerships previously, but then there was same-sex marriage. And in 2021, we're hoping, and I think everybody in this call will be hoping, that conversion therapy will finally be banned. It is still currently legal at the moment for people to be sent to conversion therapy camps and tried to be cured of being part of the LGBT plus community. And I think this just goes some way to say that we have come a long way, but there are still some things that we need to consider and need to improve for things to be equal, really, for LGBT people. Personally, I think the influence of the media has quite a significant impact on this. The talk around LGBT plus education was interesting. So a couple of years ago, there was the No Outsiders start to look at education, talking about same-sex families. This became a big thing in the media, and almost it became very sexualised. Young children were not being taught about same-sex relationships in terms of actual sexual activity. They were being taught about same-sex families in the way that they're taught about single-parent families, mums and dads, etc. A lot of the media took intersectionality into account and started to say that a lot of the protesters there were Muslim. As well, in the media, there's a lot of different language used. So if there's a story about a gay couple, the word lover tends to be used quite often. It's quite sensationalised. It's over-sexualised as well. So, for example, when George Michael took his own life, despite the fact he'd been with his partner for quite a long time, they were described as their lover rather than it being his partner or his boyfriend. And then token LGBT plus characters, there's always jokes around people in horror films, and you always know who's going to get killed first. But some of the things that have come out recently, so in Disney film, there was talk that Elsa was actually meant to be LGBT originally, and in the second film, she was going to have a girlfriend. That never happened over fears of how that would be received in different countries. And then also films like, for example, Pitch Perfect, which maybe isn't the most, film critic example, but Cynthia in this example, a lot of her storyline is around her being gay, and quite often the token LGBT characters, their whole storyline can be based on their sexuality rather than, for heterosexual characters, they've got a lot more about them and a lot more to their storylines. The other thing with the media, and I think it's worth pointing out, that the average reading age in Britain is 9 years old, which means that the average adult in Britain has a reading age of a 9-year-old. A lot of this is to do with the ways that newspapers are written, and so that the news they can access, some of the red top papers, for example, essentially that might be a lot of the kind of news, or news in inverted commas, that they actually can digest. These are some of the headlines in the past few years from different media sources where they've particularly attacked trans people. And so, in 10 years, we'll ask how we allowed the trans lobby to hijack childhood. Trans rapists are a danger in women's jails. And we all know, the amount of training I've been on and conversations I've had around toilet and facilities used for trans people, and it's just taken completely out of context, and it's completely wrong the way that it's discussed more often than not. Tran and wife, slip on a frock chaps and be a top 100 woman. And this idea that if this is the only news that they actually digest and the only news they see, the image they would have of trans people and the transphobia that then creates. So this is a map of where the country is basically different colours depending on their laws or legislation against predominantly gay men, in some cases same-sex relationships, but predominantly gay men. So the countries in blue are where people who are LGBT plus are in some way protected by law or legislation. Countries in grey is where it's a little bit neutral. So there might not be any laws discriminating against groups, but there's certainly not laws protecting them either. And the countries in red is where it's actually illegal, in some cases still in 2021 punishable by death. I've had a couple of good examples of this when I've done training. So some people have said this is a map where LGBT people live, which is certainly the case. We know that LGBT people have always existed, always will exist, and exist all over the world. But it's also a map where it's illegal. All the countries that are coloured in is where it's illegal to be heterosexual. And again, the inequalities that people can face based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. recent reports, and this is from a charity called Report Out, who we've done some work with in Derbyshire. It's illegal to be LGB, and again, mainly G, in 71 countries. These include, Egypt, Mauritius, Indonesia, UAE, so Dubai, for example, Sri Lanka, Jamaica, a lot of countries where people may want to go on holiday. And again, I've had questions about, why don't you go here? What about Dubai? We can travel there. Well, actually, for me, as a member of the LGBT community, that might not be the best idea. As well as that, the column on the right, so the following also have anti-LGBT propaganda or legislation. There's a list of countries there where things are starting to turn for the worst. Rupash, I do apologise for putting Poland twice. That wasn't on purpose. They're not doubly bad. But the idea that there are some countries, particularly in the kind of Eastern Europe area, where things are starting to go backwards. Chechnya as well is a real issue at the moment. And there's some really quite scary things going on there. So actually, I go back to the point of, who am I? Who am I and why am I doing this talk and why do I think it's important? And the fact of the matter is, I am a partner, I'm a friend, I'm an auntie, I've got 6 godchildren, I've got colleagues, I can play several musical instruments. I've worked or done work as a coach and a trainer in a football capacity. I am a Derby County fan, unfortunately. I'm a history graduate. I am soon to start a postgraduate qualification, so I'll be going back to being a student soon. I'm a teammate in football. I'm female. I'm British. I absolutely love my food, as anybody who follows me on Twitter will know. I am still that little girl in many ways. I mean, I dress a little bit more appropriately than that now, but, I'm still got that football and wanting to sort of run around and spend a lot of my time outdoors. And I'm also gay. And all of those things are a part of me, and all of those things and all of the people that come into that as well make a part of me. And with the possible exception of being a Derby County fan, which is pretty painful at times, the biggest part of me quite often, or the bit that's caused me historically the most stress and the most upset, is being gay. So actually, yes, it is 2021, but as somebody in the 20s, that's still something that I've really struggled with over my life, really up until a couple of years ago. And part of that was because I experienced homophobia quite often, particularly as a child. I was listening to something earlier around Ida Hobbit, and they said that for children where sexual orientation or sexuality isn't being explored yet, often the discrimination they will face is based on gender identity and gender norms and what is considered acceptable for their gender. And I think that really struck a chord with me, because as a child, this is one of the only photos you will find of me wearing a dress. I hated wearing dresses. I was told I had to wear them, that I had to wear them to school. There is video footage of me somewhere at my mum and dad's wedding screaming because I didn't want to be wearing a dress. I wanted to be wearing either my Spider-Man outfit or a Derby County kit. But I was told I had to wear dresses because it was what was expected. And if I'm honest, I did that up until I was around 22 or 23. I don't tend to do it now. I don't do it now. I'm much more comfortable in sort of trousers or not a dress anyway. But gender-wise, it was something that was expected of me. So because I was a tomboy, that was something that people could actually pick up on. I was told to stop playing football, and I was actually removed from a boys' league. I will be totally honest that my behaviour didn't help in this way, because when I ran past the boys when I was playing football, I used to laugh, and sometimes they used to cry. But I was actually removed from the boys' league on the basis of me being a female. And I was very lucky that my dad was able to set up a football team. But if I hadn't have had that, I might have had something that I really enjoyed and really thrived in taken away from me. The last 3 are quite difficult. I was made to listen to homophobic language. I was taunted, and I was asked if I wanted to be a boy and asked why I was such a tomboy. And those last 3 things actually happened at home, predominantly by my mum, but also by my brother. And that over time was something that I really struggled with. I was told quite often from a young age that I was not to come home or I was not to be gay. I think there were some fears over the fact I was such a tomboy. And so there were some kind of moves towards me wearing a dress, being more girly. I was kind of pressured into giving up football, which I never did. But I was pressured into that and tried to do more naturally feminine things. And that really started to chip away at me. And before I even knew what being gay was, I knew in my own head that it was wrong, because I was being told constantly that it was wrong. So from a young age, I was experiencing homophobia from the people I should have been able to trust, and from the people whose opinion at that time I did trust quite a lot. So actually, what did this do? And what was the impact on somebody who was, about 7 years of age, 7 years old upwards? So what did it do? One of the things was that I changed how I presented myself. I did become more feminine. I, was always more comfortable in boys' clothes, essentially, in a football shirt, running around playing football. But I would make an effort to be more feminine if I went out with my friends. Again, for those who know me will know I am a little bit sarcastic on occasion. I was really difficult to teach because I was a pain. I thought if I became the class clown that people would laugh with me, and I kind of could use that to deflect and to avoid talking about the fact that I knew I was gay, and probably a lot of people around me knew were questioning, but I used it to deflect, and I used that humour and that sarcasm to stop people getting too close. Ultimately, underneath all that though, I was massively ashamed. So as well as hiding my sexual orientation, I did for 6 years in my childhood suffer from sexual abuse from a family member. And that was really difficult for me to be hiding these two massive things that as a child, it's very hard to carry around with you. That led to self-harm quite extensively from the age of around about 11. And it also led, as you can probably see from this picture, to quite a period of binge eating and binge drinking as well when I was about 17. I relied on alcohol for a long time, didn't really know any way to get around that. And I ate a lot because I thought in my head that would sort of avoid any attention from boys, and then I wouldn't have to explain why I didn't want that attention. Ultimately, because of that, I gave up the things I enjoyed. The drinking led to me giving up football because I was too hungover on a Saturday to be able to play. I was isolated because I didn't communicate and I didn't confide in any of my friends because I didn't think that I could, and I was unhappy. And ultimately, what this led to was a large amount of mental health issues as a teenager. This was, initially put down to depression and anxiety. But then in later years, once I started to talk about some of the things I'd experienced, they also started to think that it may be an element of post-traumatic stress. And I found it very, very hard to deal with. The self-harm at times became suicidal thoughts, particularly as a teenager and then in my early 20s. I didn't deal well with things. I was anxious, if I'm honest, for the majority of the time. And I was still hiding a couple of parts of me, particularly hiding the fact that I was gay. I had boyfriends. I did everything I could to fit in. I would, deflect any questions about my sexuality by explaining that I clearly had a boyfriend, therefore I am straight. And again, it just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled until eventually it reached a point where I realised I had to talk or something would happen. When I was 21, finished university, and my dad, who I've not really spoken about in this, but my dad was my best mate, really. So my dad is the third picture along at the top in the middle. So my dad was quite a bit older when I was born. He was 61. So he was like an old dad, but obviously to me it was normal because it was all I knew. But we got on from day dot really as absolute best mates. But when I was 21, he got diagnosed with mesothelioma, which is a cancer caused by asbestos exposure. And he was given 6 months to live. But at that time, he'd already had about 4 months of those because he'd started getting ill in the October. And I was completely floored. I couldn't imagine a world without him. And I think when you're 21, quite often being a daddy's girl, it's hard to imagine that life. And we were lucky that he had 2 years. But about 18 months later, I realised that if I didn't come out now, Dad would never know me and would never know that side of me. So just about 6 years ago now, actually, I made the decision to come out to my parents. And the reaction from my dad was a little bit of confusion because, like I said, I tried to mask that as much as possible. So there was a little bit of confusion. He didn't quite understand. But from my mum, the reaction was very, very negative immediately and has carried on since, really. She wouldn't speak to me for quite a period of months. Me and my dad sort of spoke about it. He understood. I explained that it wasn't a choice. He said he didn't mind who I dated as long as it wasn't a Nottingham Forest fan, which I've stuck to, which is good. But he kind of, came around to the idea very, very quickly and was absolutely fine. And I was really happy that he knew me and we were still able to sort of, have that such a close relationship, and that he knew me before he did pass away. He did die 5 months later, quite quickly in the end. And just before the funeral, my mum actually kicked me out. I said that, essentially to make a decision between being gay and my family. For me, that's not a decision. Being gay isn't a choice. And so I sofa surfed for a little bit, lived at friends' houses, sort of went backwards and forwards to home in a very difficult and quite a toxic situation and relationship. And because I'd been a carer for my dad, I actually luckily managed to get a full-time job at a local secondary school, as I mentioned earlier. I made a real conscious decision when I joined Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service to be out from day one. And I'm sure we've all heard people say, oh, for people who are part of the community, they will know that you don't just come out once. You come out sometimes every day, sometimes it might be once a week or once a month, but you do constantly come out. So I made a decision quite early on at DFRS to be open. And it's the best thing I ever did, because it kind of, it really helped me that everyone was just like, oh, okay, yeah. It wasn't an issue. It wasn't something that I had to explain over and over again. For me, who'd grown up expecting it to be a massive barrier to my life, suddenly I was working in a place where, if anything, it helped me with work, because it had given me a lot of empathy, gave me experiences that I might not have otherwise had. I think what's important here, and I will talk about allies a little bit later, is that everybody on here has helped me be me, and has helped me and accepted me, and in some way, and it might be a very little thing or it might be a big thing, that they've helped me to understand that actually being LGBT isn't such a big deal. It actually, the benefits it can have can bring certain things to your personality that are really important. And for me, like I say, that's why joining the fire service and working in different roles and now being part of the inclusion team, that's been they want to be too naff or too cliche, but that has been a real life changer for me, really, in many, many ways. So I talked earlier about who am I, and I've been, maybe a little bit negative or a little bit sort of down on what being gay has meant to me, and particularly as a teenager. But actually, as a 28-year-old, as somebody who's been out for 6 years and been out in a place of work now for 4.5, what has it meant? I'm definitely mentally stronger. I'm a lot more aware of my mental health, and I'm a lot more willing to talk about it. And I know that has made me a lot more confident in my own ability, both professionally and personally. I've been able to meet new people. So there's various people on this call that if I hadn't been part of the LGBT community and sort of willing to stand up and happy to stand up and share my story like this, I probably wouldn't have met or have not had the relationships with that I have. I like to think that I'm someone I needed when I was younger, and I'm very passionate about working with young people and letting them know that it's okay. I am in a relationship, I am getting married, I am, holding down a job and really happy with myself. I am still unbearably sarcastic. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but I think one of the ways that I can respond to people being a little bit ignorant sometimes is with sarcasm and twisting that round so that people can see actually how it can be a little bit silly. I'm definitely more self-aware. I am happier because I'm no longer pretending to be something that I'm not, and I'm a lot more balanced than I ever was as a teenager. So I don't want to just, bang on about my story. That would be boring. What's important here is actually how can everybody on this call help? And I include myself in that, because I'm an ally, for example, to the trans community, and I'm really passionate about that part of my role and that part of what I enjoy doing. A massive thing is understanding. So yes, your other sister, friend, colleague might be LGBT and be fine and have not had that impact on their lives, but actually a lot of other people may have been impacted by accepting themselves or by what's happening in society or at work or as part of their family. So understanding is vital, and being able to communicate that can be listening to diverse stories and different people's experiences, but it might also be your element of communication. So asking what would help somebody, asking how you can help them, whether that be in the workplace or personally. If you're not sure, educate yourself. I am really frustrated by ignorance. And if there's something that you don't know, or if there's something that you're not sure about, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm always happy to sort of answer questions or be able to point them in the right direction. There's a lot of rubbish on the internet, but there's also a wealth of great resources. So, resources like Mermaid UK, Gendered Intelligence, Stonewall, local charities, there's lots of good stuff out there. So if you're not sure, there's so much out there now to educate yourself. And I would really sort of recommend that wherever you can. If you're managing somebody or work with somebody, notice the change. So is somebody, not as chatty as they normally are? I know it's harder in a COVID world that you're not sort of noticing people in the office necessarily, but think about if somebody's changed and if there's something you can do to help. Avoiding shaming and generalisation. So again, when I worked in a school, that's a bit gay was bandied around all the time. I actually outed myself to a group of year 9s in an assembly because of that comment. As soon as you use gay or, don't be a girl, you throw like a girl, whatever it is, whether it's gender or sexual orientation, try and avoid that if you can. I'm not policing what you do and don't say, but thinking of language is important. The amount of times I've been asked what my husband's name is or, something around that. And it to me, it sort of makes me laugh a little bit now, but to other people who are perhaps questioning whether they can be out or not, it may revert them back to talking about an opposite sex partner, even if they're with somebody of the same sex. For those who have a network, make sure it's effective. The most important part of your networking service may be confidential support. And I know certainly in Derbyshire, myself and the person I co-chair with have helped sort of 3 or 4 colleagues who were really struggling with their sexual orientation. And even if you only help one person in the lifespan of your network, the difference you may have helped to that one person or may have made to that one person is massive. And finally, challenge. And this is really a plea across the board, but particularly in management. If you can't challenge, or if you don't feel comfortable to challenge, then other people won't either. So if you hear something that you don't think is appropriate, doesn't fit in with your values, being able to challenge is such a massive help. And it avoids the people who it may be aimed at or about. They shouldn't always have to challenge it. It should be a job of allies as well within that. This really is just, a summing up of everything that we've achieved as a service. This is not me. This is a massive team of people, from being visibly representative, being at Prides, doing conferences, having rainbow lanyards, which was a big step for us, just to sort of highlight some of the things that you can do. And that's me really. Happy to answer any questions or sort of, take any comments that may be useful for anybody at this point.
Thank you very much. And look at that, I love that. Sort of virtual round of applause there. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you for sharing your kind of real personal lived experiences. And I think it's fair to say that much of what you were saying, though you're clearly a lot younger than I am, again, it's weird, isn't it, how even kind of decades apart, living in different areas, the way that we're made to feel and the language and the behaviours are so similar. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Is again, like really did resonate with myself. Got a hand up, so I'm going to hand over to Catherine.
Afternoon all, I'm Catherine Padden. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for Suffolk Fire. This is my first one of these meetings, so thank you ever so much for having me. My question, I suppose, to the group broadly, but also mostly to Rachel, was I've had some really, so I'm new in role, I've been in role for 6 weeks, and I've been having some really kind of quite intense and interesting conversations, especially around our preparations for Pride and our involvement in Pride, around why is this relevant to me, or why is this relevant to the fire service? And I think there've been very small pockets of information, and it's very broadly accepted that absolutely it is completely relevant, and bringing your whole self to work and serving our whole community is so important. But I suppose from your perspectives, what's a kind of, I suppose, non kind of combative, like non-sarcastic, my personal response would be like, because it is duh, but like what's a kind of slightly more conducive way of having that conversation would be your suggestion?
Yeah, I think you're probably asking the wrong person if you want in non-sarcastic. I think for me, quite a key thing, and again, you've got to think of the way to phrase this, but it is almost why not. We'll always try and be honest about where we are in Derbyshire, and I think we have had some kickback in the past about attending Pride and why, and also if positive action might be aimed at LGBT plus communities, actually, what impact, why are we doing that, how is that relevant? For me, firstly, we've got to be accessible to everybody. And we know that for older LGBT plus people, for example, they may well be living a secret life or a double life, maybe. So for those people who might need safe and well checks, or they may need, those home visits because they're vulnerable, actually, they may be the people we need to go to. So there's a community safety aspect. But I think a really sort of key part to me is that, and from personal experience, if I hadn't worked in an inclusive environment when I was in a really difficult situation at home, if I hadn't had the allies at work, and part of that is going to Pride, and part of it's having pin badges and being visible, I'd have been in a really nasty mental place, because coming to work was a bit of a respite for me. It was a chance to sort of be myself and not be worried about being judged or having, comments made all the time. So I think when we're talking about being inclusive, we've always got more to do. But if that doesn't include all aspects of our community, then we're not doing our job. And inclusion has to involve everybody. So even if you've got that one person who doesn't agree with it, that's where we need to start sort of changing those minds and trying to have that conversation. So that was as non-sarcastic as I possibly can be.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I think as well, one of the things, I would almost say, have you ever been, clearly you've never been to a Pride, because it is one of the most incredible celebrations of diversity that anybody will probably ever go to. And it's, gay people are, and, people that are out from the LGBT community are old, they're young, and if you're looking at our risk profile, again, it's important that we show people that we're accessible. And for many people that are LGBTQI+, they will probably have their preconceived ideas of what public services are like and how they've been treated. So it's important that, again, I think we attend to show people that we're inclusive and to show people that our services are accessible for them all. And also, they will probably never, ever experience as much love for the fire service in probably a 2-hour period as they will in a Pride celebration. John, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks. I was just going to say, in response to Catherine's question, I think if I experienced that kind of resistance to our organisation attending Pride, I'd be questioning the individual about, so which other groups do you think we shouldn't engage with? Do you have a list? Do you have a mental list of people that we should and shouldn't engage with? And just try and tease out exactly where that individual's resistance is coming from. Ultimately, however, our organisations have a duty to do this. We've got a moral duty and a legal duty to do it. So eventually, after trying to negotiate, if the negotiation doesn't work, it will still have to happen. And remind people that attending any kind of inclusive community development event sends out a message of inclusivity, regardless of which group you're engaging with on that particular day. I look for signals of inclusivity from companies and organisations I deal with, and those signals of inclusivity are not just ones aimed at me as a gay man.
No, thank you, John. Well said. And yeah, kind of definitely, I think that's sometimes definitely what we would like to say. But no, thank you for everyone's feedback there. Rachel, there are great comments coming through. Really, absolutely loving your presentation, and inspirational story is coming through. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, and kind of the love there for a bit of the older reverse mentoring, and lots of thanks coming through there. Tough listen, and you kind of said it was going to be there, but and thank you there, recognition of being the best ally that you can be. So no, really lovely feedback. Thank you, everybody. This is certainly an open, inclusive and safe place. So got another hand up there. Come on then, Charlotte, in you come.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you, Rachel. Brilliant presentation, and a delight and a pleasure to listen to you as always. Thank you for making me feel old, and thank you for making it about Derby County versus Forest fans and not Leicester City fans. FA Cup, there you go. But I actually want to follow up on what John just said and what colleagues have said about challenging those questions. And I love what John said about, well, where's your list then? Which ones is it that you are supporting, or which ones is it that you personally, for some whatever reasons and motives, is deciding that this organisation can and cannot list off? And one of my favourite pushbacks is just to say, yep, because last time I checked, the amount of glitter we wear, we get off our arse and do stuff. So if you've got all of these other little bodies that you'd actually, why are we going out to support Pride? Why don't we? Yeah, good question. Why don't you? Why don't you? If you've got something that's close to your heart, if you've got something about veterans, if you've got something about elderly people, if you've got something about a disability charity, a network or something else, get off your arse and do it. And what you'll probably find is that your LGBT colleagues will absolutely muck in and come along and lend all of that glitterous brilliance to getting things organised and getting support networks built. I think allies are absolutely key to that as well, but we can ally each other. Don't ever think of allies as a generic sort of off-the-shelf resource that is straight heteronormative and will come in and toe the party line. Let them learn and find it out their own way, but also be an ally yourself. Be an ally to another member of the LGBT community. Be an ally to someone who's not, in order to help them understand why they are, and then that intersectional allyship amongst the very different qualities that make up our own unique barcodes. Really, that was all.
Thank you. And I think some of the what's been said there, Rachel, John, Charlotte, is that, and it's echoed really by the leadership of the NFCC, and that's we've genuinely, and Wayne framed this wonderfully in his Lunch and Learn. We've got to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable, And it is really hard, those initial conversations. They do make you sweat a bit and your palms to go all like a little bit clammy. But do you know what? We've got to start doing it. We've got to start pushing back and really being brave and saying that, no, why would you not? And it's not about calling people out in a disrespectful way. It's just about helping them to ask questions of themselves. And sometimes people just need that little push to take themselves into that learning zone of uncomfortableness. But I think you've definitely got the backing of probably many people that are sat there going, challenge, please challenge, because we want to take inclusion forwards. Dylan, over to you.
Just a really quick one. I'm going to borrow with love something that I saw that came out of one of the last Women in the Fire Service sessions, which was what you permit, you promote. And actually, there's probably a lot that we can learn about challenging inappropriate conversations or behaviour, because I think a lot of the time, something we've certainly talked about within Bucks is giving people the tools so that they can feel comfortable with calling out behaviour that might not necessarily be appropriate, or an inappropriate conversation that might be labelled as banter. So yeah, that's something that I'm probably going to borrow with love quite a lot and start using, because I think it's actually quite powerful that by saying, if you're allowing that to go, if you're allowing that to happen, you're ultimately promoting that behaviour, or that is something that's acceptable within your FRS.
And I know it's something that we are talking about at the NFCC, and I'm sure in your own services and lots of different groups. It's how many times has something been said in an organisation, and people have let it go, and then afterwards, kind of behind the closed doors of some got set behind someone's back, said, really didn't like it when they said that, but I'm not a racist, or I'm not homophobic at all, but I really didn't like what they said there. Well, there's a difference between do you know what, call it out. If you genuinely are anti-racist, if you are anti-homophobic, then call it out. Why should you have to listen to someone else's view? Share your view and say, I respectfully, but I do disagree for these reasons. And I think it's now about us finding our voices and our strength to be anti, and to have our say in relation to our values as well, because they are equally as important, if in not I wouldn't like to say more so, but maybe they are in the context of our values as an organisation. Thank you very much indeed. How are we doing? And it's interesting, I'm just linking through. Anna said there that she's found building sector specific evidence. So to Catherine's point, the NFCC Equality of Access to Services and Employment for LGBT communities is quite useful in providing, again, the evidence, because as services, we like to be risk-based and evidence-led. So that document's come out recently, and you may well find some evidence there to support some of your, not arguments, but conversations around why we should be doing the things that we know that we should be doing. Thank you. Any more questions or comments from anybody? Jamie.
Hi everyone. Rachel, what you've really said today really touched me to the soul, really. I had a similar experience growing up, and going through school and being called girl as you were going through school, and being called a boy, and I know exactly how hard that can be to take, and how to and how that makes you feel, and it's like a constant battle every day. And so stuff like that really resonated with me. But going into your service and coming out as gay from day one, sorry, Freudian slip, from day one, did you have any other supports? Did you have a team, or were you like a one-man band? The reason I'm asking, I'm a fitness instructor for North Wales Fire and Rescue Service, so it feels like I'm a one-man band banging his drum, trying to make it as loud as possible. But apart from having our LGBT allies, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of movement. I won't say support, because there's the support there, but the movement to allow people to know that support can be taken on a daily basis, or just have that confidence to be able to speak out.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I think I'm very conscious of the people I can see on my screen, so who work for my service. So I won't censor what I say at all. But I think when I joined, there wasn't. I can see Rick looking at me. There wasn't a great deal of LGBT work that had gone on. There was like a network in the past that had stopped, and based in headquarters as I was when I first started, I maybe felt like, and I did self-title myself for a short time, the only gay in the village, so I'm with you on that concern. However, I think once I started talking and actually sort of going on to stations as well, and I met Steve and I met other people who were part of the network, I soon realised that it wasn't only me, and further, it wasn't only me that was passionate about changing things. So I'm not going to say we're the most diverse service in the world, because we're not. But what I found was that by sort of talking about my experience and setting up a network and being a little bit patient, that helped. We are predominantly allies, but I do feel lucky that, and I'm not just saying it 'cause he's on the call, but Rick, for example, who's our DEP, has always championed what we do. And he hasn't had to. It's not because he's worked as part of the team. And we've got some really proactive allies. Rupasha, who I work with, is, always sort of really push the cause. And it's not just me. And, when I talk about this stuff and we think how far we've come as a service, I'm not being humble when I say, it's the team, because it is. And sometimes you need the person who can stand up and say, this is me, this is what I've been through. But equally, you need those people behind the scenes working. So I think the best thing we did was set up a network. The first meeting, we had 4 people there. One of them said he was there because it was his job. There was me and a firefighter who's gay, and we just said we might as well go down the pub and just have a drink, because we're not going to change anything. But we persevered and we carried on, and now we're sort of over 30 members, and we've got some really active allies. We've got some really active, people who identify as part of the LGBT community. So I think taking that step was massive for us. And so maybe it felt like I was the only one, but in reality, I wasn't.
And Rick's got his hand up there. Rick, would you like to come in?
Well, I just had to if Rachel said something there. So, yeah, I work with Rachel in Derbyshire, and I've heard this presentation a few times now, quite a few times. And I must say, even now, even virtually, it's a lot better when it's done face to face, if I'm honest with you. But even virtually, the first part of the presentation is really sobering. The reality of where we are at as a society, as well as humanity, I suppose, looking over the whole of the globe, and the journey we've still got to take, even in this country, to get where we should do, where we're truly inclusive, everybody's truly equal. And then the second part of Rachel's presentation, she's incredibly brave, incredibly open to be able to talk about some real serious challenges in her life that she's faced and overcome, come out the other side a stronger, more reflective woman, able to take on the world in this role of inclusion, or certainly in Derbyshire. And it's just fantastic to have a part of a team along with Woo there driving things forward. So just wanted to say thank you for doing what you do so well.
Thank you, Rick. And again, I think it's see the little smile on Rachel's face. So I think it is so important that the leadership really is top to bottom. So thank you, Rick. Really appreciate your words. Just coming to potentially the end, unless there's any more kind of questions. Just a couple of bits to update you on before we Dylan, I've mentioned it a few times, but I didn't today. I normally introduce Rachel as the award nominated Rachel Salmon. So yes, Rachel has been nominated for the National Diversity Award. Looking forward to be able to introduce her in the future as award winning Rachel Salmon, but we'll await to be seen. So just before I kind of do bring it to a close, a couple of bits I'd like to come in with, and that is we've got the data survey out there. How many times have we said, why can't we collect consistent data? It's your opportunity. So opportunity to feed back into the NFCC data survey. So it's a survey, not on data, but on data that you kind of collect. So hopefully, I think Wayne's on the line. Have I summarised that okay, Wayne?
Hi, Catherine. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council and the EDI Project Board, and Rachel's been a really integral part of that, so a really important point to put this in. We're trying to collect data around what services do and collect in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion. So why do you collect the data you collect? What data do you collect? To help us make sure that we've got a richer, rounder picture of the data, and then likewise be able to use that data intelligently to enable us to be better services. So it is out there. We're extending the returns. We would ask you, if you haven't already completed the data survey, please to make sure you do. Could I ask you all, if you haven't, to just encourage you, obviously yourself and your services to complete that survey, really help us as part of our EDI journey. As I said, Rachel's a real integral part of that and doing some really great work for us around data capture. So that's it from me, Catherine. But can I just end by saying, Rachel, absolutely outstanding, really true, heartfelt presentation and certainly educational for everybody on this call. So from totally echo Rick's comments. For myself, really proud to have you as part of the EDI project board and really proud to have you as part of the data work stream. So keep doing what you're doing the way you're doing it. Fantastic. So thanks, Catherine.
No, thank you, Wayne. Appreciate that. So yeah, fill in the data survey. One other bit, we've talked about the Equality of Access to Services documents, and one thing that we're really keen on, like we talk about, is having our work that's risk-based and evidence-led. So we are giving a shout out for any academic papers that may be out there. So in your EDI professional world or in your fire service world, those academic papers that may well help build the foundation of some of the research that we're working on within the EDI work stream. So have a little think about anything. And if you do have any research documents or even kind of links or even names of them, then please forward that to Penny and we can begin to capture that additional academic research. And one of the final points just to kind of cover today that fill you in on, if you want to get involved at all, talked a lot, Wayne was saying there about the work stream that Rachel's involved with. Rachel's also involved with the EDI Hub. But if you would like to get involved with any of the EDI work that's going on within the National Fire Chiefs Council, genuinely is an exciting time. There's a very strong commitment. And I think the difference I'm seeing now is that things are really happening. Action is really happening. So if you'd like to be involved, please contact Penny and put your names forward. We would, again, the great thing about having more people is we get more diversity and then we certainly get a better outcome at the end. Which leads me to the end. Firstly, thank you very much indeed for all of you attending today and your conversations and indeed comments and questions. But indeed, thank you ever so much to the award nominated Rachel Salmon. I'm never going to stop saying it, Rachel, but genuinely to echo Wayne's comments and many people's comments, really heartfelt and a really real presentation today. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your life with us. It's much appreciated. And thank you for certainly enhancing all of our knowledge and understanding of how we can make a difference to the people that we interact with and the inclusivity of our services and sector. Rachel, you're a star. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody. And like I said, be brave and make sure that everybody feels as uncomfortable as they possibly can, because that's how we learn. Take care, everybody, and thank you for your time.
I hope you have found this podcast informative and it has given you insight. All Lunch and Learn sessions are available at www.ukfrs.com.